Can Alabama still be elite without Nick Saban? Now, the Alabama Crimson Tide have a very interesting season in college football coming up because not only do they have to worry about Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC, which is going to make arguably the toughest college football conference even tougher, you also don't have the greatest coach of all time coaching your football team anymore, Nick Saban. And that's a massive blow to the Alabama Crimson Tide because the last time that they lost one of the best head football coaches of all time in Bear Bryant, Alabama had some rough patches in the 80s and 90s where they weren't all that good. But then Nick Saban took over in 2007, and outside of that loss to UL Monroe, he got that thing rolling and won tons of national titles for the Crimson Tide. So Kalen Deboer, the new head coach in town, has a tall task ahead of him to be able to keep Alabama football among the elite in college football. Nobody's expecting him to win multiple national titles like Nick Saban did, but if Kalen Deboer can just have Alabama consistently make the college football playoff, which will be a lot easier now that it's a 12-team playoff instead of a 4-team playoff, and Alabama can at least be able to win maybe a national title under his tenure, I think most Alabama fans would be pretty satisfied with that. But still, some Bama fans are never going to be satisfied because how can you follow up Nick Saban? But I'm going to go over the Alabama football's 2024 football schedule and their roster and see how many games I think that they're going to be able to win with a very tough SEC schedule. Now, when you look at Alabama football, not only did they lose Nick Saban, arguably the best coach of all time, they also lost a lot of their players from last year's team. They lost Caleb Downs to Ohio State. They lost a few recruits, a part of the fantastic 2024 recruiting class that they had, and they suffered more transfers than that. So it's not like Kalen DeBoer was able to convince everybody to come back. But Alabama still has a core part of the roster from this past season, and they have a lot of talented guys coming into the program, even though their recruiting class is slightly worse than it would have been if Nick Saban had to remain the head coach, but it's definitely not that bad at all. But when you look at Alabama's roster, the quarterback position is always the position that people focus at the most, and Alabama has technically a Heisman contending quarterback coming back for this season in Jalen Milroe. A lot of people are not high on Jalen Milroe, but he was in the Heisman running last year, and he's one of the favorites to win it this year. Do I think he's going to win the Heisman? Most likely not, but still, he did overall have a good season this past year, and I feel like a lot more people will be looking at him more favorably if he just didn't have that fumble in the Michigan game in the college football playoff. If he did not fumble in that game and Alabama won and they somehow had won a national title in Nick Saban's last season, then I think that Jalen Milroe would be looked at a lot more favorably than he currently is. But still, as is, Jalen Milroe is a very talented player. He's just not the greatest quarterback in the world because his passing still needs to be worked on. He's a great runner, but I think he's going to continue to get better because he wants to get better, and that's the most important thing. Alabama doesn't really have anybody notable at the running back position. Justice Haynes looks like he's going to be the starting running back, but as long as he can be a good option next to Jalen Milroe and put up between 500 and 1,000 rushing yards this season, then that should be good for Alabama. Then at the wide receiver position, they have a lot of new faces. Kobe Prentice is a returning guy, but then most of the other players are new. Ryan Williams is a true freshman. Caleb Odom's a true freshman. Those guys have to be broken in. You also have a transfer in Gurmy Bernard, who probably will be a starting receiver, and Kendrick Law is back as well. So Alabama does not have some of the notable names like they've had at wide receiver the past few years, but they still have a lot of talent at that position. CJ Dupree is at tight end, the transfer from Maryland. He's back for another season. He's more of a blocking tight end than a receiving tight end, but still a good player. And then Caden Proctor at offensive lineman. His return is huge for Alabama. He transferred to Iowa, and then he kind of screwed Iowa over by transferring back to Alabama in the same offseason, which was absolutely crazy, but it's massive for Alabama. Tough for Iowa that he did not stay there. But Alabama's O-line's looking pretty decent. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they have a lot of talented guys, even though they don't have as many notable names as they did last year. Because when you have a great defense, those guys are going to go off to the NFL, and then you have to replace them with new guys. Malachi Moore is one of the more notable guys that is returning that people will remember from this past season. But they have a lot of new faces on defense, which isn't always a bad thing. I think their defense is going to be solid, but maybe their defense will be a little bit worse than it was this past season. We'll just have to see. Only time will tell. But as long as Alabama's defense isn't really a weakness, then that will be huge for their chances of being able to make the college football playoff at the very least. They also have Graham Nicholson as their place kicker. He came in through the transfer portal. He's a very talented player. Should be able to help Alabama's field goal kicking game still be very good like it was this past season. And then when you look at Alabama's schedule, that's the key, because no matter how good your football team is, if your schedule is too tough, then I do think that Alabama could drop some games. But Kalen Deboer, he's a very good coach. He's got a fantastic record, did a great job as offensive coordinator at Indiana, great as a head coach at Fresno State. And we know what he did with Washington, getting them to the college football playoff and making it to the national championship game. But now you're in the SEC. You got a tough schedule, but you're starting out with Western Kentucky and South Florida. Those should be wins. I know people are going to talk about the South Florida game this past season, but if Nick Saban had have had Jalen Milroe, the starting quarterback in that game, instead of experimenting with Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson, then I think that Alabama would have easily won that game by a lot more. But still, the Crimson Tide should easily win their first two games. At Wisconsin is a tough road test for Kalen Deboer in his third game as the head coach of Alabama. But Wisconsin is nowhere near as good as they were when Barry Alvarez was the coach back in the 90s and 2000s. Right now, Luke Fickell is trying to get that program back on track, and they are trending in the right direction. And Camp Randall is not an easy place to play. But if this was a week one game, I would be more worried for Alabama potentially dropping this game. But since it is a week three game and they have a bye after this game before the big showdown against Georgia, Bama should be able to win against Wisconsin. Georgia at home. This game right here is going to be on everybody's mind during this college football season. In week 5, Alabama does have the home field advantage, and they have owned Georgia for the most part the past few years, even since Kirby Smart has taken over the program and actually shifted the paradigm in college football where Georgia is kind of the best team now. It's not Alabama anymore. Even though Alabama has all those titles with Nick Saban as the head coach, Georgia has been able to take that top dog spot in college football as the best team, winning 2 titles in the last 3 years. But I do believe that Alabama, having that confidence of knocking off Georgia all these times, even last year in the SEC championship game when a lot of people, including myself, thought Georgia would win, I do think Alabama is going to have a great shot to win this game, and it is at home, and it's tough to go in to Bryant-Denny Stadium and win, even though Texas did it last year, but that was in week 2 of the season. This is week 5. Bama's coming off a bye. I think this is 60-40 leans Georgia's way. I do think Alabama will not be favored in this game more than likely, but Alabama will have a great chance to win. If it was in Athens, I would go with Georgia in a heartbeat, but I do think Alabama can win. And if Alabama does drop 2 or 3 games this year, this probably will be one of them. Then you have at Vanderbilt. That should be a win. I don't really see Bama losing that game. Then they have South Carolina at home. Another win for Bama. South Carolina's trending in the wrong direction with Shane Beamer, head coach. I don't really see any issues with that game. Then you have a tough 3-game stretch of at Tennessee versus Missouri and at LSU. This stretch right here for Alabama, I have a hard time seeing them go unscathed, winning all 3 of these games. Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava, he's going to be broken in for the first time as the starting quarterback at the beginning of the season. We'll have to see how he does. And Tennessee did knock off Alabama the last time that the Crimson Tide went to Neyland Stadium. So it's going to be tough for Bama to win this game, but I do think that Tennessee is going to be a worse team than they were when they had Hendon Hooker when he knocked off Bama. So Bama will have a good chance to win this game, but it will be tough. Missouri, I know people are high on the Tigers. That's why they're ranked at number 11 to start the year. But Missouri does lose some key players from this past season's team. I know they got the running back in Schrader. I know they have Brady Cook back as well. But I do believe Missouri could be a bit of a worse team this year than they were last year. And it's at home. Alabama might have a good chance to win this game. Then you have at LSU. LSU with Brian Kelly at head coach, always trying to prove that they're legit. I think LSU will be a team that flirts with the college football playoff. And if they do beat Alabama in this game, will have a great shot of making the playoff. But Bama has been able to win at Death Valley before, but this is going to be a very hard game for Alabama, especially coming off 2 really tough games with Tennessee and Missouri. It is off a bye, though, so that will help Bama some, but going to be a very tough game, and I really think there's a great chance Bama loses that one. Then you got Mercer, which ironically is not in front of the Iron Bowl this time. Usually Bama's easy non-conference game is always before the Iron Bowl, but it's not this time. They are easily going to knock off Mercer. Then then at Oklahoma. I know people are thinking that Alabama could drop this game too, but Oklahoma, kind of like Tennessee, is Jackson Arnold at quarterback instead of Dylan Gabriel. If they had Dylan Gabriel still, I would be more confident in thinking Oklahoma could beat Bama. Jackson Arnold is inexperienced. I know by this time in the season he will gain experience, but still, with Jalen Milroe presumably still healthy at this point and playing at a high level toward the end of the year, most likely, I think that he'll be able to outperform Jackson Arnold. And Oklahoma's defense is not going to be good enough at this time in Brent Venables' tenure to be able to knock off Alabama in my mind, but things could change. We'll have to see. And then finally, you got Auburn. This time it's at home. I know Alabama almost blew it last year at Auburn, but still Bama was able to survive. Alabama has tended to do better against Auburn when they're at home, so Alabama should win, but it's the Iron Bowl. You never know. So what do I think Alabama's record is going to be in 2024? I asked people on Twitter, and the results were mixed. 42% said 9 wins, 4% said 8, and 14% said 7 or less. Those people must just not like Alabama, because I don't really see Alabama losing more than 5 games. That most likely will not occur. Even though Kalen Deboer, it's his first season as the head coach of Alabama, there could be some growing pains, but Alabama's roster is still too good, still too many pieces in the foundation for what Nick Saban built. I just don't see Alabama dropping off that much. But for me, it was really tough going between 9-3 and 10-2. I was on the fence both ways, but I trust Kalen Deboer enough that I'm going with Alabama's record in 2024 being 10-2 and 6-2 in the SEC. I think the games that they have the best chance to lose in this year will be the Georgia game and the LSU game. Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Missouri are possible, but I think those games are more winnable for Alabama. And if they do drop a game to Tennessee or Oklahoma, then I think they will beat LSU. I just don't see them losing 3 games. But if they do lose 3 games, based off name recognition alone and the tough schedule, Alabama could still sneak into the college football playoff. But at 10-2, which is where I think Alabama is going to be in 2024, they will easily make the college football playoff, and it will be a pretty solid first season for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, even though some people won't be satisfied with that. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. How many games you think Alabama football is going to win in 2024, and whether you believe that Kalen DeBoer is going to have a lot of growing pains, that the Crimson Tide might drop 3, 4, or even 5 or more games, or whether you think that Alabama will go 10-2 or possibly even better in Kalen DeBoer's first season. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.